All right, today is Sunday, June 26, 2016. This is episode 164 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hey, Jerry. How are you tonight? Good, sir.
I'm doing well, though retirement appears to be a few more years away, given my 401k. Thank you, Brexit.
Well, it will come. Look, just don't panic. It's a good buying opportunity.
I've already sold everything at the bottom. I've liquidated everything for pennies on the dollar, and I have buried it in my backyard.
Okay. Well,
there you go.
When's the next time you're going to be out of town?
Yep. So
it is quite striking. We were talking before the show how wrong all the predictions were on that. So yeah. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of politics around that I don't fully understand, and we don't talk politics on the show, but obviously it's a big deal, and it may actually have a lot of impacts on things like data sharing laws and privacy laws and all sorts of stuff. But what's funny is we were having a discussion at work. Well, what does this mean for X, Y, and Z? And the answer is we have no idea yet. There's a whole bunch of stuff we don't even know. It's going to take months and months and months probably to figure all this out.
And possibly even years, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But you know what really surprises me is that everybody seemed to the stock market, bookies, everybody kind of got it wrong, even though Nostradamus predicted this how many hundreds of years ago?
That's true. In his 8th book, as I recall.
Yeah.
And I think the follow-up prediction was you may grow your hair back.
Ooh. Yeah, I don't know about that one.
Oddly enough, though, depending on how you translate it, it may not grow back on your head.
Now that I can believe. So anyway, just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employer. So getting into some stories we have for tonight, the first one comes from the ErrataSec blog, and the title is Ethereum, the DAO Hack Simplified. So
written by an acquaintance. I don't know if he would consider us a friend. We consider him a friend. I don't know if he considers us a friend of the show, Robert Graham.
More of like an annoyance, probably.
Us to him or him to us?
Us to him.
Yeah, that's fair. Carry on. He doesn't listen to the show anyway.
So anyway, for those who are in the know, Ethereum is a cryptocurrency, much like Bitcoin. As Robert describes in his blog post here, there's a whole bunch of different crypto coins, cryptocurrencies out there. A lot of them really don't have any significant differentiation between Bitcoin, and Ethereum is one of the few exceptions to that rule. And they actually added this concept of smart contracts, and the idea is that you can program in logic, so they call them smart contracts. So you can kind of effectively impart logic into these currency transactions. And so basically, the example Rob gives, which I thought was just a great way to explain it, is if you let's say you are hosting a conference and you need to sell 100 tickets, right? And but you can't have the conference if you don't sell 100 tickets. And if 98 people buy tickets, up at the deadline, all those 98 people need to be refunded their entire ticket price. And so you can codify that logic into the transaction. And you can probably see where this is going. so that smart contract concept requires the ability, again, to effectively put in code, right? And
Not just put in code, but for random sellers and buyers to insert their own code
Right.
into into this.
Right. And
Now,
so,
now before we go any further, does this sound like a good idea in principle to allow random people to insert code in essence to your application?
um, I'm thinking that it has been a really bad idea for a long time, or it's been well known as a bad idea for a long time, that you should not accept user input like that.
Especially code from the
Uh,
user. Now, to be fair, let me set the stage very carefully. My understanding of blockchains and how they work is weak. So I'm sure that there are folks who understand this much better than I do, who can justify why this is a good idea. But at the surface level, when I read about the fact that as you go to sell something or evoke a transaction in this blockchain, you can in essence use their JavaScript like language to not only code the contract, but insert code for the transaction itself beyond just where to send the transaction results. And that just seems fraught with peril.
Yeah, so the some attacker, I mean, just to cut to the quick, right? There's
Yeah.
this group called the DAO, right? DAO, I believe DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. So it's basically like an organization as code, or code as organization. Not sure which way you would say that, but in any event, basically what happened was this DAO, the DAO, was effectively a investment house, but it was, as far as I can tell, not it wasn't like an organization per se. It was based on the smart contract. You could buy into it through the Ethereum concept, and then you basically had voting rights on what the DAO, in DAO, not DOW, invested in, and then you would reap the rewards of whatever gains were made, or I suppose also suffer the losses. Um, and so apparently, what happened was the DAO had about $100 million worth U.S. dollars worth of Ethereum out of about $1 billion worth of market capitalization, at least at the time. And the attacker apparently was a customer, signed up as a customer of the DAO, figured out that there was a weakness in I don't know if you would call it the protocol or the mechanism which uh, a sell I'm struggling for the right nomenclature, right, but a sell transaction would trigger, and effectively found a way to cause that selling transaction to recurse. And it kept recursing basically until all of the money had been transferred, all $100 million had been transferred out of the DAO into this person's account. Uh, we have no, of course, we have no idea who that person is. If you go back and read some of the links that Rob references here, there's a little more detail, such as apparently the DAO recognized that this was a potential problem, and they were in the process of fixing it. They were about to release a code update, and but they apparently, while they were preparing that, they got Rob blind. And there's also some interesting detail that Rob didn't mention, which is that I guess in that recursion, it didn't get down into the dollars and cents, so there was still some money left. And apparently the bad guy or girl actually went back and kind of completely cleaned them out. I mean, went back and went after the small change, like, so that they took everything. And the hypothesis is that this wasn't as much, a major bank heist, so to speak, as it was an attempt to destroy the DAO entity. So pretty interesting stuff. There was there's some interesting discussion about how Ethereum is talking about forking the the blockchain, so to speak, so that they could actually blacklist the recipient address, so that they could in turn recoup the money that was stolen from the DAO and then give it back to the DAO. But that's a really complicated process, and it's really against the whole concept of cryptocurrencies in the first place, which is, you're not supposed to do this kind of thing. It's not supposed to go like that. But at the same time, I guess you're not supposed to have $100 million stolen from you either. So, um, that's the problem. But apparently the most interesting thing I thought was that the attacker apparently approached the Ethereum. I don't know if it's a group, the controlling body, and offered to give them some of the proceeds. I guess it was a third of the proceeds.
Yep.
So $30 million. At least I don't know if it's still worth $30 million, but $30 million if they did not fork it. So kind of interesting. But apparently as far as I can tell, they're not going to honor that, and it sounds like they are moving ahead with forking it, which kind of tells me, that may indicate that this is probably not the most well governed of currencies. On the one hand, you can say, well,
Isn't that the whole point?
Well, when I say it's not the most well governed, the whole point is that the protocol shouldn't be making special compensations for transactions for a particular party, which is what's happening here.
That's fair.
And so I think that's I suspect people may lose faith in it. Although if you're one of the people affected, you probably like the whole idea. The more interesting thing for me is, this whole blockchain cryptocurrency, thread is part of a, kind of the building on top of the internet, looking at, kind of the next layer up in the stack, so to speak. And I think we're starting to see some of the limitations in, not properly thinking things through. Right.
And there's all this talk of using the blockchain for all sorts of business purposes in the future too. It's, it's more secure, it's less corruptible, etc. But this shows an example of, if you don't design it incredibly carefully, people will find a way.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially, in the today's world, we are very much around minimum viable product, and kind of get things out the door fast, and that a lot of times,
hence your children.
Well, that's true, yes, and that often comes at the expense of really thinking through all of the implications of problems like this. And that's my cautionary tale, is that as inevitably we move forward into this sort of thing, we need increasingly smart people to really think through the implications. Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain has so far proven to be pretty robust. We hear lots of issues with wallets being cleared out and things like that, but those are not really protocol problems. Those are really more attacks on endpoints and on badly run Bitcoin exchanges and that sort of stuff. And so that, in my view, and I think Rob even points out that, that's an example of one that was thought through pretty well, and apparently Ethereum may not be.
The challenge of, I don't disagree, but there's an interesting counter to thought out by very smart people to trust it. Isn't that kind of what gets us in trouble with things like the NSA approving encryption ciphers? And, ultimately we're trying to, for lack of a better term, democratize technology and move away from a central elitist role. And I say we, I mean the folks who like the concept of Bitcoin and blockchain and that sort of thing, the sort of anarchist vibe there. So to go back to saying, well, we don't really understand it, but we have to trust it, seems counter to that mode of thinking of what those folks are trying to achieve.
It certainly is interesting. I mean, I think this is the my view, just to the extent I've been exposed to it. It's kind of like extreme democratization, right? I'm not entirely sure that anarchy is the right way to couch it. I think it's it's more it's moving away from the whole republic concept and more towards the actual
Direct democracy.
hardcore libertarian democracy, where everything is down at the lowest level.
Right.
So anyway, if there's more development there, we'll bring it up. But it's an interesting thing to me as technology marches forward and we continue to kind of build on top of things, to watch this sort of stuff go horribly wrong. I mean, in this particular case, that's a lot of money. I mean, that's it'll be interesting to see what happens to Ethereum in the long term. I don't know. I'm not a cryptocurrency analyst, so I don't know if this is a existential threat to Ethereum or not, but we'll see.
Well, in some ways, it's probably good to have these sorts of failures happening early in the existence of this sort of technology to hopefully learn from and make it stronger going forward. But
Yep. So moving on to our next story, and this one comes from ZDNet, and the title is CVSS scores are not enough for modern cybersecurity defense. This is something that we've talked about in the past, and I think Michael Reutman has talked about this quite a lot, and it was danced around some in the controversy that swirled last year's, or I guess it's really this year's.
And for those who don't know, who's Michael Reutman?
Michael Reutman was he's given a number of talks. He used to work for a company called Risk.io. Now I think it's called Kenna Security.
Yeah, they renamed.
And they were the ones who wrote the vulnerability section of the Verizon DBIR, which was met with much controversy, which
Indeed.
has finally died down, by the way. This is something that comes up again and again, and I really think that we just haven't fully wrapped our head around the problem space here. And now I think the concept, one thing I want to make very clear is this is the result of a report from a vendor called Knopsec, who provides, unsurprisingly, a different angle of vulnerability prioritization and remediation. So got to keep that in mind, right?
Right.
But having said that, I think a lot of what is discussed rings very true. We as an industry generally focus very heavily and myopically on CVSS. We focus on CVSS 10s, and that's what we patch. But when you actually go through and read the actual report, they point out that vulnerabilities tend to be heavily skewed towards the higher end of the scale. They tend to be up in the 9-10 range. But there isn't a lot of there's not a lot of correlation between what's actually being exploited and its CVSS score. And so from that perspective, we're probably focusing on the wrong things. And that's kind of the core concept here, is that we're as an industry and as an IT shop, we're focusing on patching or prioritizing those things in a way that doesn't serve us, because we're not going after the things that are most likely to get us compromised.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. And in theory, CVSS is actually the score is only one of three scores that are supposed to be computed together to give you the actual CVSS score. But nobody does that. So there's a temporal score and an environmental score that nobody really uses. They just use the base score, and the concept of the other two components helps you understand what the score is in your environment. The challenge is that we want the easy button. So most of the organizations I've worked with, especially if they have any sort of oversight or governance or whatnot, they will have SLAs typically built around patching certain vulnerabilities, and that SLA will be varied based on the criticality as governed by the CVSS. Or for instance, PCI will say anything over a 4 has to be patched within a certain period of time. But this is a microcosm of actually looking at the actual risk involved with that particular exploit or vulnerability, I should say. I shouldn't say exploit, I should say vulnerability. And there's a lot more ways to look at this. I think it's a good starting point. It gives you something to compare against. But when your entire governance model is based on this, you're losing sight of the big picture. And here's the fundamental problem: is that most organizations have limited resources to do patches, and a patch has its own risk inherent to patching. You typically have to take a server down. You've got to interrupt business. You've got to reboot the box. Potentially, all these things could cause a problem, and the patch may break something in and of itself. So, I'm not saying not patch, but I am saying that there is a trade-off between uptime, functionality, business risk, and patch risk, and you've got to figure out where your organization falls in those. And when we have a very sort of blasé approach to saying, well, it's a CVSS score of 8 or above, which means it's a critical, which means it must be patched within 30 days, and that's it. That's a very sort of unsophisticated way of looking at this, and not a very mature way of looking at this. And when I think about this, the challenge to what I'm about to lay out is you really need to have a mature organization to do these things well, which means you have to have good asset management. You've got to have a good understanding of your environment. You've got to have a good understanding of your applications and your data flow, all these things that are difficult to come by unless you have a really mature organization. But not all criticals, in my mind, are created equal. I may care a lot more about a critical that's an externally facing application that's open to anonymous hits from the internet by far than I would care about that same critical on a lab box that's sitting 3 firewalls in. Now, I want to patch that lab box because I do need to think about every endpoint being hostile. But what am I more likely to get popped first if I'm prioritization? I care a lot more if there's a known exploit in the wild for that particular vulnerability. I care a lot more on what that particular server is doing, right? Is this an endpoint or is this a server that runs my payroll? What kind of data or applications, do I have any sort of mitigation tools that I can stand in front of that vulnerability? I don't know. Let's say it's Poodle or Poodle against TLS as an example. There are WAFs out there that can block that and can spot people trying to exploit that particular vulnerability and stop it cold in the stream. So now I've got a mitigation tool that stops it, that buys me time to patch. And so to figure all this out, you really need a lot of time and smart people to sort of, or good systems to sort of hash this out. And by the way, the people who wrote this article happen to sell one of those pieces of software that help you figure this out, of course. But having run a lot of vulnerability management programs, there is definitely a challenge when you have people dictating to the vulnerability management folks patching rates and patching cycles when they don't truly understand anything beyond the CVSS score. And I don't think it's a good true measure of risk. I think it's better than most. I think you got to have something, right? And the flip side of this is that we've seen even low risk vulns be exploited to give a foothold, and then people turn around and do an escalation to a higher level, and then turn that around, and then they can do more critical exploitation, and even the smallest hole can turn into something big. So I'm not saying ignore lower criticality of vulnerabilities. They need to be patched too. But I'm saying when, much like a budget, if I'm running out of money, I got to choose who gets paid and who doesn't get paid, because somebody's not getting paid. So I've got to choose where I need to spend my patching cycles to get the biggest bang for the buck for lowering risk in my organization. And I think just basing it purely on the CVSS score is not a very mature way of doing it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I kind of went off on a rant there.
No, I think that's right. The the point that I think Knopp is pointing out, which by the way, it's an odd name for a company because Knopp in the context of computer science usually means no operation, which means that you're not doing anything, and
Right.
so that kind of means it's do nothing security to me. But whatever. Um, sorry,
Dude, don't point that out, man.
sorry guys.
This is this is kind of like when Scientology got founded. If you're just causing all sorts of trouble pointing that out.
I know, I know.
They're
Well,
coming after you with black helicopters.
we leave a trail of pissed off vendors in our wake. So, um,
It's and it's gonna get worse.
yeah, that's right. So, so anyhow, I think the point is that we really have to be looking at a better way of prioritizing. Michael Reutman, there's a bunch of talks that he's given on other ways of looking at prioritization. This company has has their own view, which mixes in availability of public exploitation and inclusion in malware, particularly exploit kits, and also interestingly, I thought chatter on social media. So specifically references to the vulnerability on Twitter, which
I get that. I think that might be a flash in the pan sort of metric.
well it is, and I think that as I thought about this, the concept again rings true to me, right? That we're not doing a great job at focusing on patching the things that are the highest risk. But at the same time, I suspect we have a bit of a hindsight bias going on here, where we're trying to do some regression testing, and things are lining up in ways that if you were to be faced with a new vulnerability tomorrow, I don't think that would make sense. Not the least of which problem comes from the fact that all of those factors can change on a hour to hour basis.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fact that there is no exploit, public exploit right now, doesn't mean that in 4 hours from now that's still the case.
Right.
And so it's an imperfect science, and I do think it's an area that we just have to find a better way, right? Because as you point out, we have a fixed amount of time and money and energy, and ultimately we can never patch everything. No one. I'm not aware of anybody who can. I do think we ought to be looking at new technology opportunities, cloud and other things, as an opportunity possibly to fundamentally change the game so that you can patch more aggressively. But that's not for everybody, right? I mean, that's a transformation that's going to take many years, and in the meantime people are going to keep getting compromised. So
Yeah, if you have a great deal of budget and a great deal of time and a great deal of energy, you can build an infrastructure that's resilient to patching. You can build full redundancy and seamless failover and full QA environments and user replicated environments, and you could test all this and but once again, that is fundamentally based on having a whole bunch of resources, which we rarely have. And ultimately, this is the balance of companies are trying to figure out if I've got extra resources, do I want to spend it on making my application or my product or my service better, or do I want to spend it on patching?
Yep.
Or general vulnerability management? And I don't know. The tough part is some of the compliance regs force it, which can be a double-edged sword. They don't have a choice but to patch if they're going to keep compliance up. But at the same time, it seems like a lot of IT organizations still just find patching and all that sort of stuff a distraction, a side gig, a taking away from their main goal as opposed to built into their expected life cycle of whatever it is they're doing.
That's a really great point, and I do see that quite often, that it is not viewed as part of their normal activity. You know, it's kind of like it's other parts of the job, such as maybe, I don't know, timesheets or whatever. You know,
Right.
those are never, you know, that's never like an explicit part of the job. It's just something that you have to do occasionally as necessary, and it's not really a recognized thing in a lot of organizations. And I think that's a great point. Um,
Well, and I think it's getting worse.
yeah, yeah,
I think the average net number of patches for a given host is going up. So for the same people administering the same boxes, they've got more patching to do. And it seems like we're getting ourselves even further behind the power curve when it comes to patching.
yeah.
So I don't know. It's something that I'm struggling with, and figuring out a better way to handle it. And it seems like we're it shouldn't have to take heroic measures to keep up with patching, but it seems like it does for a lot of organizations. And I don't know. I don't know if that's something that we just in our security focus and our rose-colored security glasses are, that's our purview, and we're like, we can't understand why it's not that big a deal to the ops guys. Where ops guys are like, every time you make me patch, you break stuff, so go away. Right? It's not broken. Don't screw with it. Right?
Yet.
And right, and I'm paying an uptime, so go away. I think this is one of these fundamental issues of an organization at its most senior level has to decide the risk tolerance and truly understand what that means, and then drive their metrics and their policies around that. And a lot of organizations I see it, they have a misalignment of expectations between the security groups and the ops groups of what those risk tolerances are. So they're constantly fighting with each other because the ops group isn't built for that level of patching and downtime, and people having to come in every weekend and patch stuff, and they have little patch windows and downtime windows, and the security team's like, what the hell? Why are you so far behind in your patching? This is unacceptable. And this seems like it's a constant source of conflict for a lot of organizations.
So I just had an idea. You've heard of the Chaos Monkey, and
Sure.
in fact, there's a whole Chaos Simian army that Netflix has now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what if there were a new Chaos Monkey breed, which was one that would turn off your server if you were missing patches older than a certain amount of time.
It's fascinating, but again, that's something you'd have to have at such a high level in your organization to buy off on that. Because think of the disruption of production, which is going to disrupt
Oh,
business.
I agree, but it's one of those things. It's similar to the fundamental concept of the Chaos Monkey itself.
Hmm.
It you don't you don't get you don't get any reprieve, right? Because
Right.
that Chaos Monkey cometh, right? There's no, whereas in a normal company, you may go for a very long time without ever getting compromised, or at
Hmm.
least compromised that you know about.
Right.
And one of the great things I love about the whole Chaos Monkey concept is it brings an objective, you know definitiveness to security problems.
Yeah.
Like,
And operational resiliency.
yeah, yeah,
Yep.
you don't get any slack. It
So
is
so very
going to
briefly for
happen.
the folks who aren't familiar with Chaos Monkey, it's a concept of within the basically virtual machine forest, any one of them at any time can be turned off automatically.
And it actively does, right? I mean,
Any server could be
yeah,
shut down without warning
right.
and without planning. So the concept is you've got to build your infrastructure resilience enough to automatically deal with that outage.
Yeah, and I
And
think actually it's even it's fairly fine grained. I think
Mhm.
it'll fill up hard drives, it'll kill processes, it'll shut down servers, it'll shut down networks, it'll shut down availability zones, because at least at the time, I suspect, I think Netflix just announced they're moving to their own cloud, but off of Amazon. But I know for a while there they were. I mean, it's hardcore. The whole idea is that you can't assume anything.
right. I think it's an awesome concept. I love being to that level of maturity, but I think most organizations don't have the budget.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it's not lack of will or knowledge. It's typically
something to think about for you guys.
yeah.
So moving on to our next story, and this is the best article we could find, really one of the only articles we could find. It's from CRN.com, and the title is Sophos Slams Cylance in Blog Post as Market for Endpoint Security Heats Up. So the way I first found this, I don't know how you first saw it, but it was Cylance's retort, right? So Cylance wrote a retort to a
Well,
video.
this was sent to us by one of our wonderful listeners,
Okay.
right? So that's how I found out. It was
Okay.
somebody hit us up on the Twitters and asked us if we'd seen this, and I had not yet, and it was Silence's retort. Yes.
Yeah,
So
that's
thank
right. Okay.
to our wonderful listener who may or may not choose to be unidentified. So I will not identify them out of respect for their identity. OPSEC.
There you go.
Carry on.
So anyhow, Cylance is an endpoint security, for those not in the know, Cylance is an endpoint security vendor, a next generation endpoint security provider. And Sophos is, an incumbent, I guess what I'll call traditional endpoint security company. And, I unfortunately I haven't seen the video. I've only read a bit of the back and forth.
The video in question got yanked.
Yeah. So basically, there apparently was a video made by Sophos with a business partner who is also apparently a business partner of Cylance, and they were doing the normal kind of bake-off type thing, where we're gonna have server A running Sophos and server B running Cylance, and we're gonna throw a whole bunch of viruses at it and see which one survives. And of course, the Cylance one failed apparently miserably, and the Sophos one didn't. But Cylance claims that the business partner or an employee of the business partner, I'll use the word colluded, with Sophos to disable certain, and this is all alleged, right? Certain default features.
Let's be very clear on this. We don't know the truth right now.
Right.
But we're going to talk about this in a broader sense once we get through the story.
Yeah, and so apparently Cylance's allegations are that effectively Sophos worked with this business partner employee to create a bad representation of Cylance's product performance by selectively picking virus samples that Sophos would catch and Cylance wouldn't, and then also apparently disabling features that were important on Cylance. Again, I don't know, all of this stuff is hyperbole at this point, but I think the bigger point is a lot of this stuff is very market driven. It's all of these, I hate to say it, right, but Gartner and they're all a window into the operation of the product, and in many cases, the vendor gets to arrange how things look on the other side of the window. I don't know how to say it any better than that. And so as consumers of these products, we have to be really cognizant of the limitations of what we're seeing when we are when we're looking at these kinds of performance. I don't know what you want to call it, marketing material, right?
Well,
I was going to say propaganda, but that didn't seem like the right word.
There's so much that you could say about this, and having worked for so many different vendors in my career, I've seen all sides of this. I worked for a vendor where we went to set up a product for a bake-off against a bunch of our competitive products being written by one of the major magazines at the time. And one thing that came out of that is the guy doing the bake-off he does a lot of different things. So he's clearly not an expert in our technology. So you find that they're incredibly reliant upon what's being told to them by the vendors. And of course, they all have their own vested interest and their own view of reality. Uh, so you take that with a grain of salt. You look at things like the NCC Group and Gartner, and how they run their tests, and there's been all sorts of rumors and allegations throughout the industry for years that those are not always as black and white as they seem. There were people who no, not NCC. Who was it? People sort of stopped sending their products to be tested. Like FireEye recently did, and somebody else did. Anyway, I'm blanking on the details, but that some of these vendors didn't like the methodologies involved with these tests. And there's I don't know if this is true or not, but there's always been grumblings of Gartner is a bit of a pay to play. How much are you spending with Gartner on other consulting services may contribute to your ranking in their Magic Quadrants. I don't know if that's true or not. But that's been grumbling out there. But at a bigger level, one of the challenges or one of the realities of working for one of these vendors, especially a smaller vendor, and you're trying to come up with these competitive differentiators. You're trying to show how you're different to get traction. And to be brutally honest, to create doubt in your potential customer about your competitor. So one of the things you're always looking for is what we would call competitive intelligence. What are the weaknesses of my competitor? And the problem with this is that you're out there begging for this information, or trying to find this information, and your marketing group's trying to provide it, and it's usually crap. It's usually really bad information. It's usually incorrect and inaccurate. But most sales teams just echo it. And then if they're not careful, they're saying things that aren't true, which hurts their own credibility. Right. The other challenge with competitive differentiation or competitive intelligence is it changes so incredibly rapidly. Next version that might be completely wrong or different. So these vendors live in their own ecosphere, their own bubble, and they start to believe their own marketing and believe their own propaganda, and they think it's true. So when a video gets put together that may, in this case, allegedly had degraded the capabilities of Cylance to make Sophos look better, I don't know how you trust that very easily. The same thing's going on right now, by the way. Palo Alto and Check Point are going back and forth in this sort of thing. And all these videos keep showing up that allegedly are just independent people running these comparisons between Palo Alto and Check Point. But I can almost promise you that these are proxy folks for Check Point and Palo Alto. And I'm not going to weigh in on who's better there. But what I would say is that if you're looking for competitive information of how to decide on a product, you have to be very careful about what you believe. And even if it's coming from a Gartner, and Gartner, by the way, is the freaking easy button for executives. It's like the old rule of you never get fired for buying IBM. You never get fired for buying the people in the Magic Quadrant of a Gartner. Right. Because you've got air cover from your executives if something goes bad.
Yeah. Look, they're up there, upper right.
Right. I bought Best of Breed. Not my fault. As opposed to, well, these guys are a startup nobody's seen before, but I want to take a chance on them. Much harder to defend. And whether that's right or wrong, that's the reality in the C-suites. So in a situation like this, we kicked around this concept of taking the Pondone contest and then throwing, after you do the original Pondone, then throwing a bunch of defensive technologies set up as well as they can be by the vendor on the various targets, and then run all the exploits again. I think that would be a fair test. But this is a tough one because a lot of time the vendors are not allowed to be involved with these tests. They're not allowed to be involved with the setup beyond a certain state. And so it's tough for a vendor to know if the results are being accurately represented. And frankly, there's a whole lot of vendors out there who are more than happy to lie, cheat, and steal to cause enough doubt to give their sales guys the opportunity to. All they want is for that customer to call their sales team and let the sales team engage. Because then they trust the sales team's tactics,
right,
to get the deal done. So it's funny because when you read the Cylance blog, whether they're right or wrong, what's really funny is they say, if you really want to know the truth, do a POC of our tool. Which sounds innocuous, right?
I.e., call us out and...
Right.
get our salespeople
Seems
engaged.
innocuous, but and by the way, I absolutely recommend doing a POC. Never buy a product without testing your own environment. In fact, the punchline of this whole thing is you don't know how well that tool is going to work until you test it in your environment, because not every environment is made equal. However, when somebody says to you, "Well, just do a POC. It's, for free." It's not free. Because now you've engaged with the sales team whose entire job in life is to get you to buy their product and not buy the competitor.
And they're very good at their job.
Very good at their job. They're not there to advise you. They're not there to help you make the right decision. They're not there to tell you, what works well, what doesn't. In rare cases, they might be honest about that. They're there to get their commission check. So as soon as you engage in that POC, that comes with a manipulative and aggressive sales team. Now, there are, of course, some exceptions to that rule, but that is typically how this works. So, that being said, that's the trade-off, right? I don't know another way to do it. Certainly, you could look to a VAR who may or may not be neutral and may be able to give you some of their experiences. You could ask your friends in the industry what they've seen. Of course, if a vendor offers references, do you think they're going to offer a reference that didn't have a good experience? Come on now. So
exactly.
I guess what I'm saying is, for both good and bad posts or references or videos or whatever, take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. By the way, I think this points to a bigger problematic trend, and we've talked a little bit about this, and that is that a lot of the think pieces, like in fact the one we talked about just a couple of stories ago related to the CVSS score, almost every think piece, educational piece of material, however you want to call it, these days, the stuff that's coming out that is timely and whatnot is from a vendor who has some horse in the race. And I don't have a better. I'm not saying that I know what the what the right thing.
Incredibly expensive and difficult to provide
right
this sort of insight.
But the problem is that you have these people, these organizations, and by the way, I don't think they necessarily have malfeasance in a lot of cases. There are real altruistic motivation, but at the same time, they're coming at things from their own understanding of the market, which is heavily slanted based on what they can do, and what the capabilities of their things are.
They define the problem space as the problem they can solve, not the problem the customer has.
Right.
And the other thing that's interesting about that is when you look at something like a Gartner, they are making assumptions about what that tool does for you in your organization. So they're having a one-size-fits-all approach of this is the best tool for the job. And sometimes that may work, but sometimes you may have a different focus of what you need that tool to do. That is, maybe an ancillary or secondary feature set that isn't the main feature set. And if that tool is being judged on the main feature set, you don't know that secondary feature set may be exactly what you need.
Yeah, and so I think that my observation is that we're getting away from, and this is a little concerning and also probably contentious. I think we're really getting away from, actually having a clear handle and approach, security-focused approach, and more of a vendor-led. I'm not saying this very well, right? But hopefully the concept's coming through. But a vendor-led utilitarian approach to security. We're modeling our programs based on the capabilities of tools that are available, rather than what's right, or what makes the most sense. And we've become kind of attention deficit, and we're always looking for the next new shiny blinky box that can solve the problem that the last one created.
Part of that is the build versus buy discussion, right? And if I'm going to buy from the industry, I somewhat have to make that trade-off of what the state of the art is. The flip side of that is when I was in sales for sales engineering, and we'd go to talk to customers, and they'd be like, well, that's great, but you need to have feature X, Y, and Z. or we're not going to buy. And I get it, but nobody had feature X, Y, and Z. It didn't exist yet.
Right. Right.
So then you say, okay, I understand that we don't, but we've got features A through J that may be useful for you. And are you going to not buy anything that could help you at all? And then as hopefully the products evolve, maybe we'll add feature X, Y, and Z. And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. I guess it depends on what mattered to that particular customer. But there was that sort of tension with the industry. And the other thing is sometimes you find a customer that has one specific need that it didn't justify the vendor to build.
Yeah.
And it's a weird problem with this build versus buy equation.
Well, I guess that I was more on the point of, we always seem to be hitting the button of what security product can we bring in to solve our APT problem? What can we do? What new thing can we put on our workstations to make it so that our Swift accounts don't get hammered, or rather than taking a different approach of saying, okay, how do we just fundamentally architect things differently so that they're more robust?
Okay. Yeah, well, it's a lot easier to add a blinky box and bolt it on than try to rebuild the business process or retrain the people or change, because all these problems typically are a people, process, and technology problem. But we're constantly trying to solve it with just a technology solution or a technology control after the fact.
Well, and a bolt-on one at that. We're not, we're not even, we're rarely going back and questioning early design choices of not the security aspect or the security technology.
How are you going to justify it, right? You walk into an organization, you figure out, wow, your network is completely flat. Well, there's your problem with X, Y, and Z. I mean, how much time and effort and work does it take to re-architect an entire network infrastructure and segment it up and put firewalls in between and hire firewall admins and figure all that out? Otherwise, maybe you're trying to stop, I don't know, lateral movement of an attacker.
But
versus, or we could just monitor all of our logs from all of our Windows servers and look for that sort of activity with this shiny new blinky box.
It goes back to work is hard,
Yeah.
It's why they call it work, and you're absolutely right, and that's why we are where we're at. However, I just think, by and large, we're getting away from the fundamentals. We're getting away from the smart people doing smart things, making smart decisions, and we're getting more towards the, let's just slap some crap in there and hope it works.
I don't disagree.
So, anyway, there was one other thing we wanted to talk about, which we don't really have any particular story to talk about it, except there was a whole spate over the past 2 weeks or so. It seems to be accelerating. I know in the past probably week, I've gotten 4 or 5 different emails from services I have, like Carbonite and Pandora, and I don't even know who else. I can't remember. Saying that my user ID or email address or both or whatever was found in some previous password dump, and therefore they're resetting my ID. And this is a real problem, right? And I think it's, as we've talked about in some of the stories in previous weeks, like with the TeamViewer thing, it's becoming kind of like ransomware. Started off as an individual person problem, and now it's morphed into a really significant problem for business. This password reuse issue is starting to show up at the front door of our companies. So,
yeah, absolutely, and it was fascinating to me because we're seeing sites that weren't breached at all, not even involved with the breach, but they realize that a lot of their users are reusing passwords and reusing account names.
Well, I kind of wonder if things like TeamViewer, I mean, assuming what's been said was in fact true, there were lots of TeamViewer accounts being compromised, but TeamViewer itself hadn't been compromised. And allegedly, this was because of password reuse, where either LinkedIn or some maybe MySpace, I don't know, some credentials that were reused on TeamViewer were being used, and then that's splashing back on TeamViewer, and TeamViewer saying, "What the hell, guys? We didn't get compromised. This is the user's problem." But it's not. Unfortunately, that is tarnishing their reputation, and it's a big headache. And I suspect that we're going to see a continued focus on these online services. Really looking at
Well,
this.
I wonder if they're going to start forcing password resets over time, right? Based on, okay, you've had this password for a year, reset it.
It makes sense to me.
Well, but it's anti-customer. It's a pain in the butt for their customers. I think the fundamental solution is probably a password manager and unique complex passwords for each site. I don't think it's viable for individuals to remember different passwords on their own. They're going to need a password manager of some variety.
Oh, yeah, you're preaching to the choir.
No, I think that's the only way it's going to get done.
Yep. You know what? I was thinking about this a little bit, and kind of from the whole nudge perspective, which I really like that concept. Nudge. If you're not familiar, that's the Richard Thaler is a psychologist who came up with this concept. He was the father of behavioral economics, and he wrote a book called Nudge, and he founded this group in the UK, which apparently didn't do a good job of avoiding the Brexit. But it was called the Nudge Unit, and the whole idea was looking for what he called libertarian paternalism, where you're trying to guide people to do what you want, but you give them ultimate control. And one of the things that I was thinking is, websites should be offering a strong password, a strong and unique password to the user, but then let them set one if they want.
Yeah, I think most people would probably accept that. I don't know if they would have a rash of, do I trust it now because the website has my password, as well as other folks going, man, I can't remember that, so I got to write it down, or I've got to do a password reset. I mean, we live in a world that we're incredibly technical and we are incredibly aware of these issues, but a lot of folks just want to use their damn computer and go to their websites. And so,
Yep, you're right.
it's probably going to end up one of those things ultimately that either we're going to do something other than passwords, or I don't know.
Unfortunately, we have great alternatives. I mean, multi-factor authentication is a well-worn thing. It's relatively easy to do, but it has it's not perfect, and B, it's less convenient. But then again, so is a password manager. So
yeah. But a well-run password manager is actually quite nice and quite convenient.
Oh, I agree. I do enjoy the convenience of mine. So yes.
And I can't imagine operating without it at this point.
But I will tell you, and I ran a survey recently on Twitter.
Was it a scientific survey?
Totally unscientific, in fact. And but one thing I have noticed is that, and I suppose most of us in security have observed this. Security is a subset of a broader field of IT, and the thing about IT people is they are expert across the entire domain, right? The average IT person is an expert at programming, at security, at system administration, help desk, absolutely everything. They know it all, or at least they think they do. And and so what I have observed is that there is a great amount of variance in the beliefs around what the right way to manage your passwords is.
Yeah.
Right. There are a lot of IT people I have run into and then backed over and then run into again, who believe that
now all of our listeners are going to have to testify at the trial. Good job.
That password managers are just terrible, and that people need to come up with just a really strong password that they can remember.
I understand their point, and all respectfully, they're fucking wrong.
I mean, yeah, people can be wrong, and
Yep.
that's just the way it is. So,
by the way, we picked up a new sponsor. It's a password. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, I by the way, I still think multi-factor is the best way to go. However, it
is, but this goes back to a risk-based analysis. Do you need
Yep.
multi-factor for logging into your Wired.com account?
Well, and there is no standard, right? Passwords again are the least common denominator. I can take my password manager, which is installed on my iPad, my phone, my computer, everything, and it will log me into whatever, right? And I can't. I don't. There is no such standard for two-factor. I mean, some of them are going to send me in a text message. Some I have to log into freaking Facebook to get a activation code, and other. There's no standard.
You know what we need? I think if the Department of Homeland Security started managing our passwords for us as a centralized role of government, I think that would solve the problem.
Yeah. We just lost a bunch of listeners. Yeah, what we need is the county password inspector. See, rather than keeping it at a federal level, which is just unconscionable. We need to respect the 10th Amendment and keep this down at the state level.
You are absolutely correct. Why? Yes, absolutely. County level is probably good. State level, city level.
Yeah, that's right.
Why didn't I not think of that? You know what we could do? We could spin up something kind of like dual role as the county dog catcher and password wrangler.
Hey, they probably have downtime, right? While they're driving around looking for stray dogs.
Clearly, the government can solve this problem for us.
No one else is, right? Anyway, that is the show. Mercifully, we're going to end it here because it's not going to get better, people.
No, it's getting pretty deep in here.
So anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking through 164 episodes. Wow. Thank you to everyone who has donated to our Patreon campaign. Appreciate that. I am still working through the backlog of email, and if you should hear back from me soon. So you can find links to the stories we talked about tonight on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. If you like the show, give us some love on iTunes. If you don't like the show, don't, just move on to the next podcast.
And we're sorry we failed you.
Yeah, and with that, I should say also you can follow Mr. Callett on Twitter at Lurg, and me on Twitter at MaliciousLink, the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec, and then we will talk next week. Thank you.
Have a great week, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.